And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. You have found us here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. It is 4 p.m. ET on Tuesday, and I am your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan. I'm the USA Today bestselling author of 14 going on 15 novels of suspense. My new book is The House Guest, so casually displayed. No, it's over here behind me on the door. And my new book, let me just show you and take 2 seconds, is One Wrong Word, which is sort of fun to play with. That comes out February 6th, and I cannot wait for you to read it. But today, you all, welcome, welcome, welcome. I see you all. Hi, Susie Baldwin, coming all the way from Washington. I see you all arriving today because you know who is here today. Nita Prose with her absolutely charmingly, wonderfully, quirkily, original, marvelous mystery, The Mystery Guest. And we will talk to Nita in about 1 second. Here's Kim Rutter is here today as well. Welcome, Kim. I knew you would be here. Nita, welcome from Toronto. And we're so pleased that you are here today. This has been absolutely, oh, my notes are falling out. This has been absolutely a whirlwind for you, this second book. I see you everywhere on Facebook and Instagram. Tell us a little bit about the Magical Mystery Tour.
It has been wild and wonderful. Hank, as you know, when The MAID came out, I was relegated to where I am right now, my basement, because it was the pandemic. And I didn't get to meet readers, until many, many, many months later, and only a little bit. So to be on tour, to be in the US, to be meeting the people who have taken Molly into their hearts was so meaningful to me and really so wonderful.
Where have you been and what have you seen? You've had these sort of standing room only crowds and talked to wonderful author conversation partners with fabulous, the acclaim has been amazing.
It's been really amazing. First off, I started in New York. So I had an event at the Strand, which, the little girl writer in me was like, squealing. I was so excited to do an event there. And then from there, I went, where else did I go? Traverse City, Connecticut, Philadelphia, Houston, and probably a few other places I cannot recall at the moment.
And you have seen many a hotel room along the way.
So I sure have.
Lots of fodder.
I have seen many a hotel room, and I feel very comfortable in hotels. I feel like it's a second home because I live there in my head so much of the time.
Well, let's talk about that for 2 seconds before we get to the giveaway, because we're having a giveaway. Mary Garrett says, I can hardly wait. Loved The MAID. As you know, The Mystery Guest is the second in the series. You can read them in any order, though. We'll talk about that. Talk a little bit, though. I love the idea of you in a hotel and having this deep understanding of how the back of the house works and who, of all the people who notice employees in a hotel, I'm sure you do. What's that like for you?
It's something that I learned a lot from by simply going into hotels, and I'm not going to name which, and pretending that I work there. That is like some of the research that I did for the original book, for The MAID. And, I learned a way of being, how you can be present and invisible at the same time, which is really so fundamental to how workers work in a hotel, and certainly to Molly's identity as a maid there. And I also gleaned the most wonderful, tiny little details that you can only figure out just by doing something. You can imagine to a certain point, but actually being there and seeing something can trigger details. So for instance, when I was pretending to work in a hotel, wearing a very neutral white shirt often and black pants, which is really the uniform in a lot of hotels, I would just go around opening doors, seeing how far I could get before someone was like, wait a second, do you work here? And it's actually amazing how that comportment can, carry you through to some places that you wouldn't normally be allowed to go. And one of those details that really struck me were the trays in the hallway, the discarded room service trays in the hallway. And I thought about Molly, how hungry she is through the entire first book. She is struggling to make ends meet. She's actually enduring a horrific food shortage, and she's near faint throughout the entire book, although she doesn't really admit to herself that she's not actually eating properly. And for her to see those trays in the hallway and all of that discarded, delicious food would have been such a temptation that it would have to alter her moral compass. She'd have to think, Waste not, want not. That is why it's okay for me to take that apple, you know? And that was just a subtlety that you could only discover by doing it yourself, by being in the place yourself, you know?
Well, and now I know she has her rules that say what you can take and what you can't take, in a sort of way to write down, to codify what's okay to do and what's not okay to do, because that is how Molly thinks. You know, I've been undercover a lot of times, and I do understand the idea that a lot has to do with attitude, that you just act like it's okay for you to be there. And often a clipboard helps. Walk with a clipboard and act like you have really something a job, a chore that you have to do. Well, I want to talk more about your undercoverness in a hotel. That's brilliant, because I'm in hotels a lot for book tour, starting again now. And I see not only the food, but the disdain with which everything is left on those trays. Ketchup with napkins in it and things spilled over that would make it be so difficult for someone to clean up rather than take care of it, and how people must leave the bathrooms. I've seen places where towels and soap and gunk everywhere, and someone has to deal with that, which is why I leave big tips in hotels.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Do the staff get those tips? Do they get to keep them? Or are there battles over it like there are?
That is a good question. I think it really depends on the establishment. But, you know, I think leaving a tip is absolutely the right thing to do. And maids, because of their very invisibility, we forget just how hard and laborious that job is. It's actually a very difficult job physically to do.
I imagine people picking up the towels from the floors, and also how difficult it is to make a little bed, let alone a
big one. Exactly.
Well, see, you have consciousness. You have raised our consciousness with your novels without even knowing about it. The Mystery Guest by Nita Prose. Welcome, welcome, welcome you all to Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. If you don't know about A Mighty Blaze, and look at all of you here today. Julie Brinkley says, I'm talks about the comments is the word I'm searching for so unsuccessfully here. Says Julie Brinkley says, I love the idea of hiding in plain sight. The comments are going by so quickly I can't catch them. Undercover seems fun, says Shannon Hansen. Renee wants to know, how many tips did you get, Nita?
I got very, very, very few tips because I really wasn't doing a good job. I was just snooping around. Yeah. And I think somebody had asked if I ever got caught, and I did. And then I would plead stupidity and get out of that hotel really fast.
That is, we need to talk, sister, about going undercover, because I got caught as well, and I just acted like I was the ditziest person that had ever lived.
That's your only. How do you explain it? How do you actually explain it? I'm a writer, and No, you sound like a fool. It's better to just pretend you are one.
Exactly. And I will tell you, just between us, that I said to the person who caught me, I said, you are making me feel very uncomfortable, and I'm going to have to leave now. So I decided to blame him. So feel free to use that.
Thank you.
Use that the next time. Absolutely. Anyway, we have gone so far off the tangent. We are supposed to be talking about The Mystery Guest by Nita Prose, but all this is fodder for how marvelous this book is. If you are new to Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze, welcome, welcome, welcome. Mighty Blaze was started at the beginning of the pandemic 3+ years ago now, crazily, by Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt, a powerhouse team to keep us talking about books and discovering new books and learning about new books and meeting new authors. And we are still going strong today and will continue to do so. And let me say also that Nita Prose is giving away a copy of The Mystery Guest, not this one, because I am keeping this, but she will give you your very own polished to perfection copy of The Mystery Guest. So just enter by leaving a question or a comment in the chat, and we will pick a winner with the Wheel of Fun at the end. Let me introduce Nita Prose to you a little bit formally now. Nita Prose is a writer and longtime editor. The MAID, her debut novel, and I want to know how many of you have read The MAID. Anissa is here. Welcome, Anissa. Molly is one of my favorite characters ever, and I hope we get to see her again. We will ask her. We will ask Nita about that. Anyway, The MAID, her debut novel, was a #1 New York Times bestseller, a Good Morning America book club pick, and an international bestseller. The Maid has been published in more than 40 countries in more than 35 languages. Nita lives in Toronto, Canada, in a house that is moderately clean, she says. Her new book is The Mystery Guest, and it is getting wide acclaim and massive affection. And we are here to talk to her about that today. So, usually in these talks, I start out by asking, tell us what the book is about. But in your case, tell us about your main character, Molly.
So Molly is an interesting and unusual character. She works at a MAID in a large hotel, the Regency Grand, a 5-star boutique hotel. And she really prides herself on her work. She always does a great job. She has one sort of social difficulty. She has trouble reading social cues. And in the first book, she really struggles with that because her beloved Gran, has died a few months before the book opens. And she's learning to navigate the world through a lens without that person, being her moral compass and teaching her how to, find her way in the world with social animals, ergo human beings. In the second book, however, she's in a different place. It's 4 years later. She's learned a lot in 4 years. She's stronger. She's more confident. She's risen in the ranks of the Regency Grand Hotel. She's now the head maid, and she's in charge of a lot more things, including the Regency Grand's brand new tea room, which has just opened. And as the novel itself opens, a reclusive, world-renowned writer is about to give a very big speech, an important message at the hotel. Nobody knows what he's going to say. So J.D. Grimthorpe, this reclusive writer, shows up. And unfortunately, right before he's about to speak, he drops dead on the tea room floor. And Molly, of course, is embroiled in yet another mystery.
Only you could write something as meta about writers and adorable and charming and witty and funny. We are talking about The Mystery Guest by Nita Prose, and everything that Nita says has taken place in like the first page or two. So no
spoilers
at all. We know about spoilers. That's discussed in the novel. So here's Molly. And I adored The Maid, and I do see her growing and expanding, and she's able to cope with the world in a different way, but she still looks at the world in this quirky, marvelous way. And what's it like to inhabit her when you write? I don't think I calculated the 4 years, but I did feel the growth. How did you do that as an author?
She feels very much like a character that I know. She is a compilation of people that I knew when I was a special needs teacher many, many years ago. And I taught in a private school. And one of my favorite things was taking the kids out on field trips, not to like museums or whatever. We'd just go out in the world and we would claim space. And one of the reasons we did that wasn't to teach the students. It was to teach everyone else how to behave around people who might seem different, and sometimes, most of the time, the general public would behave really well around my kids, except for the times that they wouldn't. And I've never forgotten those times. But what was amazing is watching those young people grow, thrive, act with so much dignity and grace in the face of prejudice. They never felt a single day of feeling like they belonged anywhere. They were always faced with that sort of low-grade prejudice every time they went out in the world. But wow, could they ever deal with that with such dignity? And so when I came to writing Molly, I really took the best of those students and I gave all of their best characteristics to Molly. And that's how I formed her. And you're right. In the second book, she's a little bit different. She's more fully formed, and she's more confident in herself because she's been through a lot in 4 years. And very much like in real life, I had to ask myself, well, what happens when a person knows themselves? When we gain confidence and we feel good about where we are, what are we interested in then, if not ourselves? Because her first journey is really about understanding herself. Her second journey is going back into her past to a formative time when she was just a 10-year-old child working alongside her gran in a luxurious, if a little bit strange, mansion. And that is when she goes back to those memories and she starts to understand who her gran actually was and the enormous sacrifices that her gran made in order to keep her well and thriving. You know,
that's really wise and thought-provoking. I never thought about it that way before, but that in book one, she's learning about where she is right now, very much in the present. And now that she is more understands her present, she can go back to her past, which is really lovely and so cleverly and layered, so clever and layered. And yet she still has this, I mean, when she pins on her head MAID button, you can see how important it is to her to have a sense of belonging to some place, and having colleagues and having something important to do. The other thing that you do so gorgeously out of many things in The Mystery Guest, if you've just joined us, we're talking about The Mystery Guest by Nita Prose, is that you allow us, just as you took your students on field trips, you allow us to gauge other characters by how they deal with Molly, how they react to her. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how you decided how each character, the police or the administration of the hotel or guests or outsiders, deal with her?
Yeah, you know, I think I wanted a range. You know, when we're looking at somebody who's slightly different, everyone's going to have their different reactions to them, and I sort of wanted to portray that. I think one of the most interesting developments through the course of the two books is Detective Stark. This detective who, in the first book, you know, very quickly pins Molly as a murderer, and because she's a little bit different, because she doesn't have the same social cues that Detective Stark expects to find from anyone in her purview, she decides she is it. She's the one who did it. In the second book, Detective Stark has to grow. Detective Stark has to see that because Molly is so unusual, she's actually extraordinary in certain ways as a sleuth. There are some things she cannot see because of her unique demeanor and her perspective on the world. But there are other things that Molly can see that no one can see. And that becomes the key to solving this particular murder.
And it's so lovely to see their relationship grow and to see this huffy Detective Stark, who is so dismissive and so grumpy, sort of melt away as she realizes and allows herself to realize who Molly really is and what she has to contribute, which is sort of the touchstone for everyone who reads the book. We begin to know Molly and love her at our own speed. It's a tightrope for you, though, as an author. And as a fellow author, I kept thinking, when I heard that your second book was coming out, I will confess to you, I thought, oh my golly, how is she going to do this?
You knew, right? You knew, she's in hot water.
Well, you know, that was going to be tough because frankly, your first book was such a knockout and such a total success with such a quirky, iconic, original character that you couldn't do it again like that. You had to come up with a different way, just as good, to do it. Were you put off by that, or were you intimidated by that at all?
I was so intimidated, Hank. You know, my publishers, a few months in, when they're realizing the success of the book, were already like, well, can you do another one? Can you just write another one? I'm like, it doesn't work like that. It's just not, you know, and by that point, I had also received a deluge of love from my beloved readers. And they had done something which to me makes it all worthwhile. I had given over this character to them. When I was finished writing her, she wasn't mine anymore. She belonged to my readers. And what I saw in response was how they cared for her, how they, you know, opened up their hearts and grew their own empathy like on a little Petri dish. And they cared for her. And I was worried, if I go back to the well, if I try and give them what I keep being asked for, more Molly, give me more Molly, what if I end up giving them less? And what if I do a disservice both to my readers and to the character I created? So this was very daunting to me. And you're absolutely right about, you know, finding a new terrain as a writer is such an important thing inside a series. And for me, the first book was a mystery on the one hand. You know, I call it a Frankenstein book. I love Frankenstein books. And this is what I mean by that. It was a mystery on the one hand, But on the other, it was something the Brits call uplifting literature. You know, this sort of feel-good story which takes us on a journey of hope and inspiration and moves the spirit. That's what I wanted to do. Murder mystery on the one hand, combine it with the most ridiculous thing on the other hand, a journey of hope. Those two things do not easily go together. And therein I could find a tapestry. So in the second book, the question was, well, what do I do now? Because I can't do that again. Obviously, I had to keep the mystery part as a genre, but I really had to ask myself, what's going to be the second, the secondary genre? And that's when I went to my bookshelf and the great many, many masters before me on whose shoulders I stand. And there's a kind of book that takes us to the secrets of an old house, where that house becomes in many ways a metaphor for character development or for loss or for something. And those sorts of books really speak to me. And I wanted to see if I could write something in the second half that was an adult fairy tale, really a fairy tale for adults, set in this luxurious, strange, somewhat creepy and foreboding mansion. And if that could be somehow my secondary genre.
Well, I love this because the hotel and the mansion are sort of analogous as well, with secret places and secret doors and access that only some people have. And the people who understand the structure have access to it, and people can be kept out, and all those kinds of things that I'm going to keep babbling about. But also, you also not only delved into the fairy tale world of the secret mansion, but into the netherworld of what it's like to be a writer, and the problems of being a writer, and the joy problem of being a writer with writer fans, and the idea that that you juggle the fans and juggle the writing life is so multi-layered and meta in this as well. Was that fun to write too?
Oh, it was just so much fun. I mean, there's nothing about what I write that is real except for the emotional world. And that, to me, in the hierarchy of importance of how I write and what I write, getting the emotional truth right, to me, is the most important thing. So for me, the fun was to create a world I know very well, but to make it hyper real and surreal, to make the fans extreme. They're devotional. There's a group of ladies who are devotees of mysteries in this novel, and they are obsessive fans of this fictional novelist, J.D. Grimthorpe, and they know everything about him. I mean, they just worship him. And, Hank, you've probably met fans like this. I have too, not for myself, but, there are certain kinds of fans who really, a writer means something to them. And, they put all of their energy and hopes and dreams into the study of their work. And I actually really admire that. And in this novel, I also poke a little fun at it. I recognize it because I'm a bit like that myself. When I love an author, I love an author. Like, I will read every book they write.
Of course, absolutely. And I hope when we're finished, you have time to look at all of the comments, because that's Deborah Press says, this sounds so fabulous. Robin Stull says, I love the idea of secret access. Julie Brinkley says, getting the emotional truth right is the most important thing in the world. Love, love, love this. Julie Brinkley,
Thank you.
You are so right. There's a great line in the novel. Molly says, what do you call it when there's truth in a story, but it's not a fact? And the person says, the answer is a novel. You call that a novel. That is the sweetest thing I've ever read. How did that, do you remember that moment writing that?
It's something I think about a lot. I'm fascinated by the notion that sometimes we can find more truth in fiction than we can in reality. And I credit my mother with teaching me that, because many, many years ago, she used to tell these ridiculous stories that I never, ever believed. She told a story about how she grew up in a small town, and how one day a young girl went out into the river and she disappeared for 2 days. And when she came out of that river, everyone thought she was dead, but she actually walked out of that river. But when she walked out, her hair was a different color and her eyes were a different color, and she didn't know who she was. So there were these crazy stories. She used to tell this story about riding a pig to school in northern Quebec, deep winter. And I'm just like, Mom, why do you make this stuff up all the time? It used to bother me so much. But when she died a few years ago, I asked my very no-nonsense aunt about one of these stories, about this pig. And my aunt said, "Oh, you mean you get?" And I'm like, "You get? What are you talking about?" "Yeah, that was the name of the pig that she rode to school." And then I realized that not all of my mother's stories were made up. Some of them were true. And somehow that notion left a door open in my mind. It made me realize that you have to be very careful with fact and with fiction, because there's truth in both of them at all times. And, when I was too young to respect that, I didn't ask the right questions. I'm older now. I get it. Thank you, Mom.
Yeah, but you're older now and you get it. And that's what was meant to happen. Those kinds of stories are planting the seeds in our brains, those thought seeds that blossom if we're lucky. They blossom into something else. And all those seeds have blossomed into the mystery guest. I mean, your book, the book is so multi-layered and hilarious. And charming. And Kim is saying, "Ride a pig, how adventurous." I know I'm obsessed with Huguette now. I picture you at your computer or writing in longhand or however you do it, sometimes just laughing out loud. Did that at some of the lines that you wrote? What does it feel like to write this?
I mean, when you're in the groove, and I'm sure you've felt this many times, Hank, you have so much more experience as a writer than I do. I'm sure there's a moment where you're so in the flow and, that a line strikes you as funny and it almost feels like it's coming from someplace outside of yourself. And that's when you've really got it. That's when all right, I'm in the zone. I'm in the good place. Because I think, in that notion of, planning and pantsing, flying by the seat of your pants, there is a wonderful thing about the pantsing part when you don't quite know what's going to happen next, and where, the creative mechanism and your own understanding, your deep understanding, even sometimes subconscious understanding of narrative just, drives you and it drives you on its own. And those moments are really wonderful. They're a lot easier to take than the moments when you don't know what you're doing and you're forcing the writing. Those are hard.
Yes, the days that you tell yourself, just keep going, fix it later. Just keep going, fix it later. Yes, I've had a little bit of each of those. But still, you've been an editor for many years, and now you're a brilliant author. But the editor brain must remain with you. There's one line in the book. Let me see if I can. Someone says something. Someone says, they're talking about how devastating it is, and we all know this, to give away the end of a novel, that a spoiler is just the worst thing you can possibly do. And someone says, in a very dismissive way, "I swear some readers read only for the twists." And that's such an editor thing to write, right? Isn't it? Because
yes.
you do understand that readers do love the twist, but that's not what it's about. It's about the story. Talk a little bit about what editor part of your brain had you write that in the book.
Well, I've always had a real awareness of audience, and when you're an editor, that is drilled into you. You want your books, your authors, to be their books to be successful. You want them to have readers and eyes, and you want to keep publishing them. And, one can feel it can be a very big failure when you're not able to accomplish that. So I do think a lot about what the reader wants. And one of the ways you can build audience is through the conventions of, a genre. In the mystery genre, many readers will read for the whodunits and the twists. That's what they're reading for. They want to, follow a cast of suspects, and they want to go, not that one, maybe this one. Oh, I've got it now. I get it. I got there first. I know it. That's what they read for. I am not that reader. I read for character. I'm obsessed with character. That's what interests me in every book that I read. But I also understand that other mechanism provides a really incredible engine. So for me, I'm always asking myself, how can I appeal to as many readers as possible while still doing what I want to do creatively? And sometimes you can use those mechanisms of genre as a real driver, as an engine behind in my case, a journey of character growth.
And it's wonderful it's brilliant because you can face those situations. You can actually mention it. This, for instance, some people read for the twist, and then potentially coming up, there's a big twist, which is
it's a little
so
meta.
And so meta and so funny and just so enjoyable to read. I can't imagine being a successful big editor like you are, and then trying to write a book. Do you feel that you're reading over your own shoulder at some point? How do you do that?
I do feel like I've developed a kind of mini me that reads on my own shoulder and like prevents me from making mistakes early on. And that is very helpful. I mean, I really do credit the authors that I've worked with for the last 20 years for teaching me everything I needed to know about narrative, style, craft, and character. You know, to be along on the journeys with them, to help them solve all of their narrative problems has given me a kind of shorthand that means I can write quite quickly and with a level of confidence that I know I would not have had were it not for 20 years in this business.
Well, you spent 20 years fixing other people's work. And so now you can do that. You can do that on your own. I have about 3 more questions really quickly, and then we'll go to the reader questions because I'm seeing so many questions. Nancy says, coming in late, never too late, Nancy. Happy to be here. And Suzanne says, Nita does a really deep dive into her research. Absolutely so. And Anissa is saying you can't edit a blank page. That is indeed so true. I'm sort of tiptoeing into this question a little bit, and I hope you think it's okay. When I read the MAID, and I was picturing the hotel, which is so gorgeously cinematic, and more on that in a minute, I said to someone, "Oh, I love the MAID, and it takes place in a hotel in New York." And the person says, "No, it isn't in New York." And I said, "It isn't?" And they said, "No, it's in London." And I said, "No, I don't think it's in London." And I began to realize, and I looked for it in the mystery guest, it's not anywhere, is it? Is it in a? It's
no.
Not.
I never do say. I give contradictory place clues and setting clues throughout both novels. And one of my favorite things, Hank, is when a reader will come up to me and say, "Oh my goodness, I know exactly where the Regency Grand Hotel is." And I'll say, "Where?" And they'll say, "Oh, it's the Waldorf Astoria, New York." And the next reader will come up and they'll say, I love that book. And it was, I know where it is because I live in that city. I'm like, "Well, what city is it?" And they'll be like, "Oh, it's definitely London." I'm like, "Sure. I will say yes to anyone who tells me anything about this place and world that I've created." And the reason why is because I don't consider myself a solo creator. My job as a writer is to give the bare minimum. I truly give just the vaguest outlines of place, of character, of the hotel. And I expect the reader to bring their experience, their memories, to the fore and to complete the picture for me. And so it is, to me, the biggest compliment when a reader will come up to me and say, "I saw it here. I think it's there. In my head, it is this hotel," because it means I started and they finished. I created this book. I gave it away and they completed it for me. And for me, that is everything. That is the whole point of writing, to have this strange little piece of technology that is so rudimentary and for it to evolve into a creation that we can share.
And it's amazing because I always think about books are not really fully formed until the reader reads it.
I agree.
The way you're describing it is so perfect. You talk about not being a sole creator because the reader is creating the pictures in their mind. The movie in their mind is beginning as you just touch the dominoes and then they all fall over individually, depending on what reader it is, because I can tell you, I can find my way through that hotel. I know exactly what it looks like and where the restaurant is and where the tea room is and where the offices are and where the maids' rooms are. I totally know that, and I'm grateful for that. Speaking of cinematic, well, let's go back. One earlier question, then we'll hit the cinematic. And I'm being really careful here. Book 1, gorgeous, fabulous, huge success. Book 2, gorgeous, fabulous, huge success, different. So now, how, as the world is now clamoring for book 3, and there must be going to be one, you have another hurdle to leap over.
Yep, here I go again. I do. And it's pretty clear to me that there, another one is wanted. So again, I find myself in that same position. I promised myself, my publishers, and in a strange way, my reader too, that I wasn't going to let them ever see a book 2 that didn't do justice to Molly. And I maintain that. If I can figure out a way to deliver more of Molly that isn't less in a new tapestry, in a new form that is mystery on the one hand and something else on the other, I will do it and people will get to read it. But if I don't succeed, it's not coming out of my drawer. So, I'm in that pursuit now, trying to figure out, what else there is, where would the story go? How can I mine this for more creativity and still be, still honor Molly and the world that I've created so far. Hopefully I can figure it out.
And yes, we are crossing fingers here as well, because it is such a character-driven story. It almost doesn't matter where she takes her skills.
Yes, I think that's true. And, I make a few suggestions at the end of the mystery guest, which may or may not be a bait and switch. We shall see. But I do know there's more story there, and it might not only be her story. There's so much about Gran we still don't know. So much.
Yes, and you have given us a new Gran, I must say, in this novel. In the mansion, I won't even tell anymore about it. I will leave it to you all to read The Mystery Guest. But speaking of cinematic, and then we'll take questions. There was so much the applause and the acclaim in the chat. I hope you will have time, whirlwind, to look at that later. So what is the status of the movie, and is that terrifying or exciting?
It's a little bit of both. I think the strike that was happening in Hollywood really put things into a state of delay for a long time, but I'm glad to report that things are moving along again. And I'm hopeful that we'll see something on screen soon. Universal Pictures does hold the rights, and it's not greenlit yet, but we shall see in the future. And for me, the most exciting part about it coming to the screen is that it's exactly the opposite of the process that I just described with my reader. The reader has to create the picture because I give so few details. Well, that's the opposite in cinema. In cinema, we have every cinematic visual detail, in Technicolor right before our eyes. And so for me, the magic of that, to see that, come to life before my eyes, will be really, really exciting. And we'll have to see what happens with that character. That will also be really interesting to see her personified.
It's a tightrope, isn't it? Because we all think we know exactly what the hotel looks like and what Molly looks like. And your books are written to be books. They're written to be books, and they're written to be beloved as books. And we will treasure them no matter what comes out in the third one. We will treasure them for what they are, and que sera, sera for the rest of it. All good luck about that. And let's take some questions, you all. Okay, so Julie, hi Julie. How much of a role do you want to play as a screenwriter since the books are being optioned?
I know enough about screenwriting to know I know nothing. It is a very different art. It is a whole other thing. And I don't know, I don't think that I have the expertise to do a very, very good job of that. Certainly not on my own. So there is a screenwriter who's working away, and we've got something on the page, and it's pretty darn exciting. And yeah, I've had some limited involvement in the drafting, but really that is something I leave up to the experts.
Because so much of what we know about Molly is her thought process.
Right.
And the key is how you are going to present that without actually saying that. Again,
right.
We leave that to the screenwriters.
Exactly. And to the acting and direction. It's going to be so up to the actor and the director.
We shall see. Who else has a question? Is the editing process laborious? Hey, Patricia, or does Molly keep you going? Does she talk to you?
She doesn't talk to me. Gran talks to me. I hear Gran's voice in my head, which is really a modified version of my mother's voice, to be honest. But yes, there is that voice. And with Molly, she takes on a life of her own. I feel like my job as a writer and what I do for the reader ends up being exactly the same. I wanted the reader to step into her experience, to live in her skin, to see from behind her eyes, and then slowly through the process of getting to know her over the course of 2 books, if I've done my job right, you come to love her. But I do the same thing as I'm writing. I'm not me anymore. I sit behind her eyes, I live in her skin, and I navigate the world and the scene and whoever is in front of her as another character. That's what drives me. I don't feel like myself when I'm writing her. I feel like I'm her.
That's what we were wondering about, exactly. And the thing that works so gorgeously with that is that allows the reader to be her too. We know, and I think I can say this properly, we know what it is that Molly is seeing. And we also know what it is that she thinks she is seeing or how she interprets it. So we get our reality and Molly's reality at the same time. And as a result of that, we get a deeper understanding of her and how she sees the world. And as a result of that, we may see the world in a little bit of a different way.
I hope so. I mean, that really is the point. So here's hoping.
One last question, you all, or maybe 2. Any other questions? How do you celebrate? Good question, Deborah. How do you celebrate a book launch?
Well, it can be celebrated in many ways. But, it's nice to have a group of people who've participated in the publication, who've supported you along the way, and to raise a glass and to just, mark that moment is an important thing. And certainly this time around with the mystery guest, I was able to do that in my home city with a lot of people from publishing. And to me, that was incredibly meaningful. When I go to book events, I never get nervous. I feel very confident and like grounded. It doesn't bother me to meet readers because they're strangers. But when I'm in a room full of people I know at a launch, I was quaking like nobody's business, quaking. And I know that's absurd. I don't know. It's somehow for me that just triggered like, I don't know. I felt like Molly. I felt that feeling of like, I'm an imposter and I don't belong. And I shouldn't be in the spotlight here. It's very strange.
Or it may be that all of these people who you've known in a certain kind of situation for however long are now looking at you in a different way.
Well, and there is that. I mean, it's so strange to be on the other side after spending 20 years being the editor, which means by virtue, you are invisible and you push the author into the light. So to do the exact opposite, it's disorienting, and I'm getting used to it. And I had a lovely launch.
Well, when you start with nothing and you wind up with this, you've got to pat yourself on the back and know that it was a slog and it was difficult and you have done it to absolutely acclaim. I mean, I have to tell you, and then we'll do the giveaway. I have to tell you that I read books while riding the treadmill. And I figured out a way to keep the pages open with like hair clamps actually on either side.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And things you didn't need to know. And I gauge how good a book is by how long it takes before I look at my watch to see how much longer I have to be on the treadmill. And I never looked at my watch. I was so completely immersed in this that the time just flew by. So it gets the Hank treadmill stamp of approval. So,
I like it. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we draw? Shall we spin the wheel of fun, you all, and draw to see who the winner is? Let's spin the wheel of fun, Margaret, and see who wins. And here we go. This is so exciting. Look at all the people who are here. Thank you all for coming.
Oh my, it's amazing to see you all. Thank you for all of your participation too on these comments.
They're great, aren't they? Kim Rutter is the winner. And thank you, Kim. You have had some great questions and great comments. And so you know the scoop. You'll see on the screen how to email me, and I will email the executive producer, who will email Nita's editor, who will email the publicist, who will then email the producer, who will then give you your book. And that is how it works in publishing. That's pretty good, right? That is pretty good. So congratulations, Kim. We are so pleased that you won. Now let me keep you here for 2 more seconds for the update on the upcoming Crime Times. Next week, look at this. This is so unusual, you all, and so unique. We will do our first graphic novel next week. We have not read a graphic novel here on Crime Time, so we are going for it with this one called Where the Body Was, and we will be joined by Ed Brubaker and Jordan Harper, one of my favorite authors. On the front says, a masterfully told puzzle box mystery with a fiercely beating human heart. Beating heart, not seen here, but we will see all the pictures of this graphic novel. Then the next week, we'll take the week off for the holidays, and then we will come back first week in January with the fabulous Tess Gerritsen and her Martini Club debut, The Spy Coast. She's written maybe 40 books, but this is number 1 in her Martini Club mysteries about retired spies who moved to Maine, as you would. But today we have had the joy of talking with Nita Prose about her fabulous The Mystery Guest. Nita, congratulations on everything, and thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Hank, and thank you to everyone who's been listening.
Oh, well said, well said. Thank you all for coming to Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze today. We will see you next time, of course, and until then, remember, it is always safe inside a book, and we'll see you next time.